Thank you, Bill, for sharing your experience and perspective with us. Our second speaker is Jennifer Palka, who will talk to us about how technology, apps in particular, can connect citizens to their governments. Jen is the founder and executive director of Code for America, which works with talented web professionals and cities around the country to promote public service and reboot government. Government Technology named her one of 2011's Doers, Dreamers, and Drivers in Public Sector Innovation, and the Huffington Post named her the top game changer in business and technology that same year. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Palka.
Get up this way, sorry. I am really, truly honored. Thank you so much for having me. I have been on something of a journey of discovery over the past 3 years, and the biggest discovery that I have had is how amazing the people who run local government are. And so I can honestly say that there is no audience in the world that I am more proud and honored to speak to today than this audience. So thank you very much for having me. So a little about this journey. 3 years ago, I quit my job because I had an idea for something I wanted to do, and it kind of wouldn't let go of me. I had been working in the tech media business for a long time. I was running at the time an event called Web 2.0, and that was about the notion that while the web is very good at publishing information, it's better at actually getting people to contribute, to participate, that there's the sort of another angle to that. And that was a very big event, and it grew very fast, and we were very busy with it. But in 2008, something important happened, and that's that a lot of friends that I had in Silicon Valley started getting asked to go to Washington, D.C. And it made us think, is there an opportunity here? Is there something here that we can think about, a way that you could bring what we called the principles and values of Web 2.0 into government? And so I started talking about this a little bit and writing about it. An old friend of mine, a very good friend, who at the time was the chief of staff for the mayor of Tucson, Arizona. At the time it was Bob Walkup. And he came to me and he said, that's great, wonderful idea. Don't take it to DC. Take it to America's cities. America's cities are doing more with less every day. They're cash-strapped. And if you're really talking about participating and being involved, then that's where you want to be, because that's where the rubber hits the road for people thinking of themselves as citizens. It's at the local level, and I had never thought about that, so it was very profound for me. And Andrew said to me, look, can you get people from your crazy Silicon Valley, shiny world to come to Tucson and write software applications for Tucson? And I said, no. I don't know how to tell somebody who thinks they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg that they should go and work in an environment that's cash-strapped and thought of at least as very slow-moving. So we went around on that for a while, and then one day Andrew and I were talking about Teach for America, which is a program he had done. And it occurred to me, that's how you make this happen. It's not by offering people money, it's by offering people a chance to really make a difference in people's lives. And the day that Andrew and I talked about this, I told my family, I am quitting my job and I'm going to do this. This is important to me. It's something I really want to do. And I started this thing called Code for America. What is it? Basically, it's a way that people can in the tech industry can take a year off from their jobs. They go and we partner them with people in city government, and they write software applications that solve problems for cities. And these are open source applications, and that means that anybody can use them for free, meaning everybody in this room, by the way. But what we were really trying to do was not just write the software applications. We had a theory about what we were trying to do, which was through these applications, we would drive 3 things: efficiency, transparency, and participation. And that was kind of our mantra. So it's still about those things, but I talked about a journey. I want to tell you a little bit about how that's evolved for me. So let's fast forward to this fall. We are now finishing up our 2nd year of Code for America, the 2nd year that we've had these fellows come out of industry and work with government. And I want to talk about all 8 cities that we worked with, but I'm not going to. I'm going to start with one wonderful city, though, the city of New Orleans. Beautiful city, known for jazz and Mardi Gras, but unfortunately also known for blight, particularly after Hurricane Katrina. So our story in New Orleans starts with this guy, Alan Score. He's the CIO of the city of New Orleans. I hope there's people from New Orleans here that know about this project. The way Alan told it at our Code for America Summit, which was last month, was that Mayor Landrieu came to him and he said, look, I should be able to stand in front of any blighted property in the city, or any property in the city, and pull up the status of that property. Has it been reported for blight? Has it been inspected? Has there been a hearing, notification? And Alan said to him, yes, you should, but that's going to take us 3 years. We need to upgrade all of our systems in order to be able to get you that information. And when he says, of course, 3 years and upgrading information systems, he's talking also about many millions of dollars. There was another woman in the city of New Orleans, a woman named Denise Ross, and she said, you know what, I've heard about this Code for America thing. Why don't we see if they can help? So on behalf of the city of New Orleans, she applied to the program. We should 33 cities apply this year. And we chose 8. New Orleans was one of them. And so we recruited our fellows that year, and we sent these 4 wonderful people down to New Orleans: Alex, Amir, Serena, and Eddie. They're the fellows that took a year off from their jobs. They make very small stipend. They came to California for a couple weeks, and then we sent them off to New Orleans. They had 5 weeks to do an enormous number of interviews, everybody inside and outside government. And they had to find all that data that showed the status of these blighted properties. Turned out there were over a dozen different places that this data was held, and it was all in different formats. It was sort of a mess, and this is why Alan was saying this was so difficult. But the fellows found that data, and they brought it back to San Francisco, and we give them 6 weeks to do what we call a minimum viable product. And in 6 weeks, they stood up this. You can type in any address in the city of New Orleans, and it will tell you if it has been a report, if there's been notification, if there's been a hearing, if there's a potential resolution to this property, which often means demolishing the property. You can do other stuff too. If you're an activist who cares about a particular property in your neighborhood, you can subscribe for mobile updates and hear when status changes. You can see it by neighborhood view. And this is just a really wonderful thing. We're so proud of them. And one of the things that I noticed when they demoed this, they had a very early stage of it, very early in the year, it reminded me of something that one of the fellows talked to me about the very first year. So January 5th, 2011, our first year, we didn't know what we were doing. We had all these fellows, and we just started, and we asked them to sit down with us and just say, why are you here? Because these are people who could be doing anything. They have enormous opportunities with this technical skills that they have, but they were choosing to spend a year with this unproven program. And each of these people had an amazing answer that kind of blew my mind. I had never thought of all the different motivations, but one in particular said something to me. He was a guy who'd come out of Apple. Sorry, we're going to go back to the Apple example. And he said, I'm here because I believe that interfaces to government can be simple, beautiful, and easy to use. And I think that that's a powerful statement. It's almost a radical statement. And almost by saying it, you're being a radical, right? You're saying, I believe this. Many people don't believe that interfaces to government can be simple, beautiful, and easy to use. They expect them to be confusing. They expect them to use language that they don't understand. And this is a very important concept to us. And it's really made me think about, if we could actually go back one slide, please. This thing that you're seeing, blight status, it's not important just because it's pretty, right? There's some other things going on there. One day, Amir had come back, one of our fellows, from his time in New Orleans. I said, how was your trip? And he said, it was very interesting. I went and showed blight status to these community groups that we had used in our research. And I showed it to them, and I had little old ladies coming up and giving me hugs. They were so excited about what they saw. And I think that there's something important there. You're following an emotion, right? If there's something significant there. This is a government transparency technology project eliciting hugs. And that event made me think about this idea. What would society look like if we felt about government the way we feel about our iPhones? Sort of another radical statement. Maybe it's your BlackBerry, your Android, maybe you don't have one, I think most people do. But really, these are the things that are with us all the time. They're taking care of us. They're helping us through our daily lives. Could we feel about government that way? And one thing I know that's different is that we pay a lot for our iPhones. So that was an important part of that project. But essentially, remember, this is a transparency project. Isn't transparency supposed to be about accountability? Isn't this supposed to be about holding government accountable? Well, that's not really how this one played out. I think if you expect when you put data up online for people to see that they're going to complain, I think that you should look at blight status, because that's not really what happened. When Denise Ross took the fellows to the city council meeting where they rolled this out, actually, sorry, it was the blight status meeting where they rolled this out, there was an amazing change in tone. So in the past, there had been, I think you're all familiar with this to some degree, right? Angry citizens over here, defensive government over here. Blight status allowed them to actually work together again. Those two sides then were working towards one common goal. And I think that's so important. And what she said to them when we came out of that meeting was, you changed the conversation. And I think what she really meant is we changed the conversation. And Alan Square, the CIO who'd said this is going to take 3 years, he stood up at our event and he said, I am so proud that I'm wrong about this. I'm so proud of the work that we did. And I think the other thing is that the next time vendors tell him it's going to take us 3 years to get accurate data out to the public, he's going to ask a whole bunch more questions. And that means that there's a financial impact to this too, right? Not just in the decisions that were made about blight status being much, much cheaper than he had expected it to be, but in future decisions. And I think that those things add up. And one thing I'd like you to think about when you think about Code for America, I mean, people think we're the technology guys, right? We're the people who are going to recommend that you buy more and more technology. Most of the time, we don't. We actually recommend that you buy less technology, that you use cheaper, lighter weight technologies, because that's the technology that citizens can really, truly engage with. So there is a financial impact to this, but I think that the impact is much more than money. And the big impact really is in how public servants feel about their work. This is Carla Henderson. She's another of our partners this year in the city of Detroit. And she also, this is another picture from our summit. She's standing on stage at the Code for America Summit there. And she got up stage and she said this, when I first heard that I was being assigned to work with a team of fellows, I said, I do not need another fellows program. I do not need to babysit some people coming to Detroit. We are up to here with all the help and the people wanting to save Detroit. And I'm sure that's a familiar situation. But she did babysit our fellows for the year. I think she found out that it wasn't really babysitting, and they did an enormous amount of fantastic work. They also worked on blight. They worked with community groups to survey the neighborhoods. They created a tool to do that has now gone on to win the Night News Challenge and get funding, so that it will be a big commercial project. They worked with the civic developer community there on projects that are going to last far beyond the fellowship. And I think the thing that was sort of most emotionally impactful for her and for many people was that they created a Text My Bus application for school kids, because there are kids in Detroit that are waiting sometimes half an hour, 40 minutes for the bus to come in the morning. In the winter, they are often standing in the dark, and it's very cold, and they need to just know when the bus is going to be there so they can come out when the bus is ready. And Arnie Duncan has heard about this project and asked to roll it out to many other cities. I hope some of the cities that are here. Carla was just so excited because she realized that the work she was doing wasn't babysitting. It was creating a real difference in the lives of people who live in Detroit. And when she came back on stage at the summit, she said, this is probably one of the most wonderful projects I've worked on in my career. I'm so proud of the work that we did. And a blogger who came to the conference wrote about the summit, but particularly about Carla's presentation. And he writes in this blog post, he says, listen to her words, but watch the emotion on her face. And I think that's great. I think that's great advice for any of us that lead organizations that are very big, complex, and essentially human-driven organizations. Where you see this emotion is where you're going to see institutional and cultural change. Now, this blogger came to the event expecting to hear how a bunch of young coders and designers had come into government and fixed government. That is not what he heard. What he heard and what he saw were public servants who were incredibly proud of the work they'd done and had rediscovered meaning and purpose and optimism in their work. And when I saw that, I knew that wherever we had started from, Code for America, we came from the outside, right? We were forces for transparency and efficiency and accountability, and we were outsiders. Wherever we had come from, we had met something much, much more powerful inside government. And that's what I believe is the nation's most undervalued asset, public servants who care very deeply about serving the public. And now we see our fellows' roles, I think, properly, and that says effective tools for change in the hands of amazing public servants. Now, lest you think that we are talking always about blight or always working on blight, I'd like to share with you one other little project that we did this year. We had a team of fellows go to Honolulu, Hawaii. Yes, I know, a lot of fun. I went, it was great. And there they weren't told what to work on. It wasn't blight or business permitting as it was in Santa Cruz. They said, find the thing where you guys can have the most impact. And they had these same 5 weeks to talk to everybody there. And what they heard, not just from citizens, but from people inside City Hall, was that the Honolulu.gov website was not really serving citizens. And of course, this is a problem because we have 3 people for 1 year. There's no way they're going to be able to redo an entire thousand-page website. But what they did is they took a very innovative approach. They looked at the search logs on Honolulu.gov to see what people were trying to do when they came to the website. Turns out the top result was driver's license. Of course, in Honolulu, they handle DMV functions there. So they took, this is Honolulu.gov. So they typed driver's license into Honolulu.gov, and they got this. I don't know how well you can read it, but basically it's just a listing. So click on one of these things, and you'll get this. And you'll get a lot of other pages that look like this. And I will tell you that there was an enormous amount of information here about driver's licenses. This page tells you that if you're on active service in the military and your driver's license expires, you have a grace period before you have to renew it, which is great information. But it does not tell you, as an average citizen, how to get a driver's license. And so what they did is they took those top 10 questions that people were coming to the website for, and they put them, they created custom content around them. They put them in this interface called Honolulu Answers. So type in driver's license here, and you'll get this. Click on that first link, how do I apply for a new driver's license, and you'll get this. And this tells you in very plain English, simply and succinctly, how you get a driver's license, where you go, and a link to the form that you need to fill out when you're there. And it's in an interface that, you'll hear me say this so many times, is simple, beautiful, and easy to use. Now, the next thing they did was remarkable. There was no way in a year that they were going to be able to create all of the content that could replicate Honolulu.gov. So they did something unique. Do you guys know what a hackathon is? It's very big in my world. You bring a bunch of developers and designers together for a day or a weekend, and they create an application just in one day. These guys didn't hold a hackathon. They held a write-a-thon. They got 60 people from inside government, regular citizens, to come together for a day on a Saturday near City Hall, and they had a wall of questions that were the next 60 questions that were to be asked on the site, and they had those citizens and people in government write the custom content for them at this meeting. And it was very powerful, and they continue to do that work. And the lesson here is, and I think you all know this, right? There isn't a city out there that has extra capacity. Every city government is lacking in capacity. But when you have that situation, if you architect it correctly, the community can be your capacity. But that's not even the most important thing that I want to share with you about this Honolulu Answers program. It's this. They had a fantastic time. They had a big party at the end. And these are people who have this emotional attachment to the success of Honolulu.gov because they really care about it. Now, in the same way that I think you can see people like Alan and Carla in Detroit, that they have that pride and meaning and purpose in their work, the citizens too have this, they feel meaning and purpose when they're able to contribute to their communities in a lasting and significant way. So this is my message to you guys today. This isn't our project anymore. This is your project. And it's not even really a project, it's a movement. And it's a movement of people who care deeply about serving the public and are finding new tools to do that very well under very difficult circumstances. And it's not just about technology either, right? It's about innovation, but innovation in a very specific context. Now, certainly that context is government, but when I say government, I have a particular meaning. So Tim O'Reilly has this saying, so if you put aside politics and rhetoric, what is government? Government at its core is just what we do together. And we happen to be living at a time when there's an enormous amount of innovation in how we do things together. And the most important tool in innovation is not, as Bill said, it's not technology, it's people. Now, our fellows get an enormous amount of love for the work that they do, and I think they deserve it. Our fellows are often leaving six-figure jobs. They're doing this on a volunteer basis, almost a volunteer basis. They get a small stipend for a year. They have amazing skills. They do amazing work, and I think most importantly, they care about our future, and they believe in the value of government, and they're willing to do something about it. So they deserve all the credit that they're getting. But I would like this talk to be a little bit of a love letter to our partners in city government and all the people who are doing this kind of work without us. There's many, many more people who are using technology to innovate in government without Code for America. These people are really important to the future. And I want to add this quote that Tom Steinberg says. He says, what good governance and good society looks like is now inextricably linked to the digital. So it's not just, don't think of it as a technology innovation ghetto. Think about it as governance and society together. So these are just some of the people that we worked with this year. There are many, many more, but I just wanted to give them a little shout out. Because I truly believe that the future of our country is in the hands of people who believe that we can reinvent the relationship between citizens and government for the 21st century, and we can do it in a way that scales. That community is capacity, that scales. And I hope that all of you here are people that I can count in that category of believers. So I said I've been on a bit of a journey, and I found that it's really not my journey, it's your journey, and it's our journey together. This work happens individually as experiments in cities around the country, but it really has meaning when it's shared and it's spread, because this is not work that we can do alone. This is work that we must do collectively. And what Tim said about government being what we do together is true literally in this room. Government is what we all here do together. I hope that you will think of Code for America as a convener of that, as a spreader of innovation and of cultures of innovation, and as I said before, as a tool. We're a tool for amazing public servants who care deeply about serving the public, as I know all of you do. And so I thank you and I honor you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, for sharing your insights with us today. Our next speaker, Wes Moore, is a youth advocate, Army combat veteran, social entrepreneur, and host of Beyond Bell on the Oprah Winfrey Network. Wes will talk about how creating a community that believes in the potential of all young people can dramatically change outcomes for individuals and whole cities. Raised by a widowed mother, he overcame academic and behavioral struggles to graduate as a commissioned officer from Valley Forge Military College. He then went on to John Hopkins, where he became a Rhodes Scholar. After his studies, Wes served a combat tour of duty in Afghanistan. Wes then served as a White House Fellow to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. His first book, The Other Wes Moore, compares his own journey with that of another young man named Wes Moore, whose childhood had similarities to the author's, but ultimately led to a conviction for the murder of a police officer. Wes is committed to helping the parents, teachers, mentors, and advocates who serve our nation's youth, and founded an organization called STAND. STAND works with Baltimore youth involved in the criminal justice system. Please help me welcome Wes Moore.
Thank you so much and good afternoon. It is my honor to be here and incredibly terrifying and humbling to follow three amazing speakers. So I am the fourth. But it is a true honor to be here, and not just to share this space with you, but also tantamount, more importantly than that, just to thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment. Because the fact is, everybody here in this room doesn't have to be here. Everybody in this room could be doing something else, and you've chosen to serve. and that means something. I spent quite a bit of my life in the Army, and I'm a special operations officer and a paratrooper. And a question that people always had for the paratroopers was, well, thank you, but thank you, and I greatly appreciate it, but a question people always have for paratroopers is, why in the world do you choose to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? Like, the plane is flying fine, but you still choose to jump out of the door. And in many cases, you can look at municipal leaders and say the same thing, right? Why do you choose to take on these jobs? There are much easier jobs to take on. There's much easier things that you can do. There's much easier jurisdictions and municipalities that you can try to be in charge of. There are much easier challenges that you can try to tackle. Why take this on? Why jump out of a perfectly good airplane? And the answer is because you do what needs to be done. You fight for those who need champions. You're advocates for those who need and deserve a voice. The fact is, when you think about the work that you do every single day, you can't cherry pick. You can't pick and choose which phone calls you're going to answer. You can't pick and choose which members of your jurisdiction that you're going to decide to respond to today. And you can't pick and choose which challenges that you have to face. You take them all. And that's what makes you so unique, and that's what makes you so special, and quite honestly, so necessary. You all understand that we can't look at cities and look at cities in terms of how do we solve the problem of cities, but more importantly, how do we unearth the potential that lies within them? How do we make sure that everybody feels like they're part of something bigger than just themselves? When I went through the process of writing this book called The Other Wes Moore, there was something about the publishing industry that I didn't understand. There's actually a whole bunch about the publishing industry that I did not understand. But one thing I did not understand about it is that everything you see on the inside of a book, all of it, everything you see on the inside of it, the writing, the structure, all that kind of stuff, that's the author's intent. That's what the author wants to share with the world. Everything you see on the outside of a book, the cover, the title, the author photos and the quotes and all that kind of stuff, the blurbs, that's the publisher's intent. And the reason is because the publisher understands that they have got 3.2 seconds to capture your attention when you walk into a bookstore before you just keep on walking and you will move on to the next book. So they will do whatever it takes on the title and the cover of a book to capture your attention. I didn't know that, right? I thought they cared about my opinion. So when they call me in and they're like, and they kind of do, they want you to be happy, but at the end of the day, if you're not happy, they're fine with that too, right? So when they called me in, I didn't realize this was more of a ceremonial conversation. So we're having this conversation, like, Wes, what do you think the title of your book should be? And I'm like, you know what, I'm glad y'all asked me, because there's like 6 titles that I really, really like. And I'd done, all this sampling with friends and family. Like, I came prepared for this meeting. And I was like, all right, what about Baltimore Suns? Or what about All the Difference? Or what about Out of Many? Or what about, and I had all these different titles that I threw out to him. And I basically then said to him, I was like, so y'all can go ahead and choose between any of those 6, because I'm good with any of them. And they said, that's very kind of you, but we think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about The Other Wes Moore? And I said, that might be the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. Seriously. I said so, and they're like, what don't you like about it? And I was like, there's actually a whole bunch of stuff I don't like about it, but let me go ahead and start with 3. All right? The first thing I tried to tell them that the reason I didn't like it was I tried to be very clear that this story is about much more than just these 2 kids. It's about much more than just one neighborhood or one socioeconomic group or one race or one generation. It's about all of us. The decisions that we make in our lives, and tantamount to that, the people who we have in our lives who help us to make those decisions. So by putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact, right? That's one. Second thing I told them I didn't like about it. What self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they have written? Third thing I told them I didn't like about it. No one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anybody care who the other Wes Moore is? Right? So I said this to them, and they looked at me and they smiled and they said, those are actually all pretty good points. They said, the problem is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It's not about you. And it's not about him. The name is utterly irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title because the fact is there are Wes Moores that exist in every one of our communities and in every one of our schools and in every one of our homes. Kids who are literally one decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. Kids who every day are straddling this line of greatness, and the problem is they don't even know it. The name is irrelevant. The most important thing about the title is the other. The fact that our society is full of others. People who might not speak like us, who might not look like us, who might live in the other part of town, but whose destiny matters as much to our long-term safety and security and greatness as ours does. The others. The people who municipal leaders every day aren't allowed to cherry pick in and out when we think about who we're going to fight and advocate for. And how amazingly thin that line can really be between our life and theirs. And the way this first came about in my life and the way I first fully understood this was around 10 years ago when the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, I'm a very, very proud Baltimorean, and the Baltimore Sun was writing this article that I just received this Rhodes Scholarship. And they're talking a little bit about what the Rhodes Scholarship is, and they talk about the fact that I was now one of 32 Americans heading overseas on this scholarship, and they talk a little bit about my background. They talk about the fact that I only have 2 memories of my father. How the first memory, when I was about 3 years old, 3.5 years old, how my sister and I used to get into arguments. I have 2 sisters, one older sister, one younger sister. My older sister was about 6 years older than me. And she always used to start fights with me. And I would always be minding my own business. And she would always start picking on me, right? And so my mother, So I would always get into these fights with my sister, and my mother would always come to me and tell me, you do not put your hands on women, you do not put your hands on women. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized part of the reason my mother was so insistent on this was because of her own personal background, the fact that she was mentally and physically and sexually abused. So she always made a pledge, I will never tolerate it if I see it, and I specifically will not tolerate my son putting his hands on a woman. And so when she'd see me fighting my sister, she would grab me and say, you do not put your hands on women. And I'd have to look at my mother and say, Mommy, this is not a woman. This is Nikki. This is different. But my mother didn't see the difference between the two. And one day I'm sitting there, and Nikki decides to come up to me and start blowing in my face. So she's kept blowing in my face. And so I tell her to stop. She keeps on doing it. And she gets up and she runs away. And I get up and I run after her. And finally I caught her. And when I caught her, I cocked my fist back and I punched her. And as soon as I connected, I turned around and I saw my mom. So I knew it was about to get real bad real quick, right? So Mom starts coming after me. I then run upstairs. We lived in this little small house, and literally the room we lived in was a closet that they converted into a bedroom, but it was a small bed and a crib for my baby sister, and that was my room. I go up to this room, and I'm looking around for a place to hide, and there was literally no place to hide in this room. So eventually I just sit down in the corner of the bed, and I start preparing for my beating that was coming next, right? And then I hear footsteps, and I hear a knock on the door, and the door opens up, and it was my father. And he walks into the room, and he comes down, and he sits down on the corner of the bed, and he puts me up and puts me on his lap. And he starts explaining to me what I'd done so wrong. Why my job is to protect my family and not to hit them. Why my job is to protect women and not to go after them. And then he told me that I needed to go downstairs to go apologize to my mother and to my sister. But he told me he would come with me. So we're walking downstairs, and I'm holding on to his hand. And literally my entire hand is wrapped around his finger. And we're walking down the stairs together, and I'm looking up at him, and he's looking down at me. And I remember looking up at him and copying the way that he walked. the way he stuck his chest out when he walked downstairs. So I'm 3.5 years old and I'm sticking my chest out. I mean, my father's my hero. He was everything that I wanted to be. And the only other memory that I have of him was about 6 months later when I watched him die. And as tough as I thought I had it, as tough as I thought my sisters had it, the person who had it toughest was my mom. Because now here she was in her 20s, a late widow, she was now a widow with 3 children that she was going to raise on her own. And in no way was this the life that she had prepared for or the life that she had expected. And she was having a lot of difficulty after my father passed away, and one day called up her parents, my grandparents, who were living up in the South Bronx, and said that she needed help. And her parents gave her the answer that she was hoping they would give, which is send the kids up here, and we can help. And so we made that trek up to New York. And almost immediately as we moved up there, almost immediately as I moved up there, I found myself getting lost. I found myself searching for this definition of manhood from a whole bunch of people who, quite honestly, had no business teaching me anything. I found myself hurting people that genuinely loved me so I could impress people who could care less about me. Picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school by the time I was 8 and 9 years old. On academic probation, disciplinary probation by the time I was 10. The first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists was when I was 11 years old. And I found out when I was 13 years old that when my mother makes threats that she's not playing. And she one day decided that she was going to send me off to a military school, which I proceeded to try to run away 5 times in the first 4 days after she sent me there. And I remember because after the last time I ran away, and literally it was the middle of the night, I mean, I just kept on getting lost every time I tried to run away. The last time I tried to run away, it was because they gave me a map, because it was so pathetic that I kept on getting lost. And the map was fake, and it took me to the middle of the woods. And they found me in the middle of the woods. Literally, they found me in the middle of the woods, and I'm sitting there. It's 1:30 in the morning, and I'm crying in the middle of the woods, and I start hearing leaves rustling in the woods. And I thought it was just like wild animals, you know, like bears and snakes and gorillas that were in the, you know, suburbs of Philadelphia. Because again, I'm 13 years old. I had no idea what's going on. And I know cities at that point. I don't know the woods. The only thing I know about the woods was that in horror movies, this is where folks go and don't come out of. Right? So they found me in the middle of the woods, and they picked me up, and they brought me back to campus. And when they brought me back there, they said, you know, we weren't allowed to use any phone calls, any radios, nothing at that point, because we're in the middle of plebe system. But they said, we're going to make an exception. So they said, Moore, you've got 5 minutes. Call whoever you want. We don't care. But you've got 5 minutes to figure this out. And I called the only number that I knew, which was Mom. So Mom wasn't expecting to hear from me for about 8 weeks. And now here it is on day 4 at 1 o'clock in the morning. She gets a phone call. So she's freaking out. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, Mommy, I'm great. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, but I'm really ready to come home. You know, come get me tomorrow morning. Do you need directions? All this kind of stuff. And I continue to tell her what she needs to do to make my life easier. And she stops me. And she says, too many people have sacrificed in order for you to be there. And too many people are rooting for you. And you've got to understand it's not all about you. And I listened to her talk, and after 5 minutes, they told me my time was up. Gave them the phone, they hung it up, they sent me back up to my room. And I'd be lying if I said anything changed that night, because it did not. I woke up the next morning even angrier than I went to bed the night before, and this was really a long process for me here. But eventually I began to understand what she was talking about. And the idea that the only way that I was going to make it was if my friends were there to push me, and the only way that they were going to make it was if I was there to push them. This system is not built for individuals to make it on their own. That's not the way it's structured. By the end of the first year, I was actually doing better academically, and I could play sports because I wasn't on probation anymore. And for the first time in my life, I felt when people asked my mom, how's Wes doing, she could say he's doing okay and not be lying. And that actually meant something. So when I had a chance to go back down to school, back in Baltimore, we moved back down to Baltimore. My mother said, you can go back to school down here if you want to. And I said, actually, if it's okay, I'd like to sit tight. I ended up finishing high school. I joined the Army right out of high school. After that, I went to community college. After community college, I went to Johns Hopkins University. And while I was at Johns Hopkins University was when the Baltimore Sun wrote this article about this local kid who had just received the Rhodes Scholarship. But at the same time, the Baltimore Sun was writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who one day walked into a jewelry store. And the first 2 guys walked in the jewelry store, and when they walked in the store, they reached in their coats and they pulled out guns. And they cocked the guns back and started pointing the guns at everybody inside the store and telling everybody to get on the ground and keep your hands on top of your heads. And everybody who was inside the store got on the ground and put their hands on top of their heads like they were told to. And then 10 seconds later, 2 other guys walked in the store, and when they walked in, they reached in their coats and they pulled out mallets. 1 guy with a gun and 1 guy with a mallet went to the left, while 1 guy with a gun and 1 guy with a mallet went to the right. The ones with the guns were keeping everybody on the ground, while the ones with the mallets were walking around and just smashing out jewelry cases and taking out watches and rings and necklaces. They met in the back of the store with a little over $400,000 worth of jewelry, and one of them yelled, "Let's go," and then all 4 then ran out of the center of the store and ran outside to the adjacent parking lot. One of the people that was inside the store that day was an off-duty police officer who was moonlighting as a security guard. He was a 3-time recipient of Police Officer of the Year. He was a 13-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Force. He was also a father of 5 who just had triplets. And the reason he was working that day was because it was his day off from the police force, but he took on a second job to make extra money for his family. And he got up off the ground and he drew his weapon and he ran outside to see if he could stop the guys from getting away. And when he ran outside, he started kneeling next to cars and kneeling next to vehicles to give himself cover. But he didn't realize that one of the cars that he was kneeling next to was one of the cars that the guys were in. And they rolled the window down and they shot him 3 times at point-blank range. And he was killed instantly. There was a 12-day national manhunt for these 4 guys, and finally, after 12 days, all 4 guys were caught. And we found out that one of the people that the police were looking for, that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for the crime, was a guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And the more I learned about him, and the more I learned about this crime, and the more I learned about this tragedy, the more I realized how much more we had in common than just our names. The fact that we were living in the same neighborhood, literally blocks away from each other. The fact that we both grew up in single-parent households. The fact that we both had academic and disciplinary problems. The fact that we both were around the same age. And so I then started thinking to myself, how does this happen? And there are questions I wanted to ask, and I knew he was the only one that could answer them. So one day, I just decided to write him a note. And literally, the first note that I wrote him was like, "Hey, Wes, my name is Wes. Here's how I heard about you." And then I had a whole series of questions that I asked him. And then a month later, I get a letter back from Jessup Correctional Institution from Wes Moore. And I was explaining earlier, it'd be one thing if the letter I would have gotten back from Wes, like he wrote it in crayon or magic marker with his whole hands, and it didn't make any sense, and instead of using words, he used pictures. Because if that's a letter I would have gotten back from Wes, I would have looked at that letter, and I would have said to myself, you know what? This actually makes sense. I get it. The problem is I've never received that letter from him. The problem is the letter I did receive from him was one of the most interesting and articulate letters that I've ever received in my life. And that one letter turned into dozens of letters, those dozens of letters turned into dozens of visits, and now I've known Wes for close to a decade. And I say all this to say, this is not about creating sympathizers or casting revisionist history or anything along those lines. Wes's fate is sealed. Wes received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Him, his older brother, and 2 other people who were there that day. The question that I wanted to ask was, why was his fate sealed so long before February 7th of 2000, and what can we as a larger community learn from it? How do we keep avoidable tragedies from continuing to happen, and how do we make sure that we are consistently unearthing the potential that lies within our jurisdictions? And so when people say, they're like, so what was the one thing? What was the difference? What was the thing that made one kid go one way or one kid go another way? I tell people, listen, there is no one thing. Raising kids is amazingly complicated. And when you happen to raise kids in some of the most dangerous and precarious communities of our country, it's that much more complicated. Anyone who wants to have a debate about whether all kids are born with the same amount of assets, that any kid, regardless of where they were born, there are some neighborhoods that I would love to take you to. But I know this, potential in this country is universal. Opportunity is not. The difference between the two, potential and where we end up, is where we all come in. Because we cannot allow a child simply by the zip code that they're born into or the parents that they were born to, let that somehow define or limit them. It's not fair and it's unconscionable. So when people say, so what was the one thing? I say, listen, there is no one thing. There are a lot of factors that play into it. We talk about factors of family and faith and education and a whole collection of things, but there's one overarching thing that I know that matters. And Wes told it to me. Because one day when I was sitting inside of Jessup Correctional Institution talking to him, and we were talking about West Baltimore, and I asked him, I said, so do you think that we're products of our environment? And Wes looked back at me and he said, actually, I think we're products of our expectations. And I thought to myself, he is absolutely right. That we are not products of our environments, we are products of our expectations. And someone once said to me, they're like, it's a real shame you lived up to your expectations and Wes didn't. And I said, actually, the real shame is that we both did. That's the real shame. But what's important to remember about expectations is this. They're not born from nowhere. The expectations that people have of themselves come from the expectations that other people had of them. And they just simply internalize them and they make them their own, whether they be big expectations or incredibly small expectations. And then we simply just live them out. We are a nation of self-fulfilling prophecies. We're all part of jurisdictions that are self-fulfilling prophecies. How we, as citizens, think about every single person who lives in that jurisdiction will matter, because I can guarantee you how we think about them and the things we put in place in their lives is exactly what will then become. The ability, the chance that you have to make differences in the lives of the people who live in your jurisdiction, it is huge. And when I say thank you for your service, I don't say that to be glib and I don't say that to be trite, because the fact is we need people who are willing to be champions, who are willing to sacrifice themselves. Because fact is, behind all the numbers, behind all the stats that we can all throw out until we're blue in the face, there are human elements and there are beings behind this. And I know for a fact, had it not been for people that cared about me in a way that I did not even care about myself, had it not been for people who fought for my mom in a way that she was not prepared to fight for herself, I know how different the conclusion could have been. I stand here because there were people who believed in me before I was ready to believe in myself. I stand here because there are leaders who understood that leadership doesn't come with a position, but it comes with an intention. People who fought. And I was willing to listen. I had a colonel in military school, the school that I got sent to. He was a 3-time Vietnam veteran. This guy was as tough as nails. He was one of the adults in charge. I was saying earlier, this place is not completely like Lord of the Flies. There are adults who have responsibility at this school. And, but this guy was tough, but we loved him. In fact, my plea brothers and I used to laugh, say, I think we saw him smile once, and I think it was an accident when we saw him smile. But he was losing weight really quickly. And I found out that then he told the whole entire Corps of Cadets that he was diagnosed with cancer, and he had to leave the school. But he said something to us that day that I will never forget when he told us. We were all sitting inside the pews, and he was standing up in the pulpit. And he said to us that day, he said, when it's time for you to leave here, whether it's time for you to leave this school, whether it's time for you to leave your job, whether it's time for you to leave your community, or when it's time for you to leave this planet, make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. None of us are promised anything. None of us are ever promised more days, more weeks, more years. No one's ever come up to me and whispered in my ear and said, you know, Wes, you've got 4,632 more days left so you can pace yourself. And nobody ever will. We don't know. The only thing we do know is that true legacy means making sure that other people can see opportunity that they might not see right before them right now. The most important thing that happened to me wasn't the fact that I was physically transported. The moves from Baltimore to the Bronx to Valley Forge or wherever didn't change my way of thinking. What changed was that I found myself surrounded by people. People who helped me to understand that the world was much bigger than what was directly in front of me and that I actually had a place in it. People who helped me to understand that there wasn't a single accident of birth, not being black, not being poor, not being from Baltimore or the Bronx or fatherless, that was ever going to define me or that was ever going to limit me. So in essence, what they did was they taught me what it meant to be free. And that's all we ask. The most humbling thing about this whole experience, you know, is that we do a lot of work with students around the country, and students are like, you know, I was speaking with a group of students in St. Louis, and they're like, so what's been the coolest thing? You know, you've been on Oprah, and more importantly, you've been on Colbert, but which one of all those was the coolest? And I said, you know, that stuff has been fun and cool, but that is, not only was that never the point, that's never been the most fulfilling thing. The most fulfilling thing is the ability to have a chance to work with students, to help them to see how big this world really is. The fact that we're working and create a curriculum around this, the fact that we receive letters from parents and teachers and students all over the country, that's been the most fulfilling thing. Your job matters because there are people in every single one of your communities who need and deserve a champion. And you're there to be that for them. And for that, we're all appreciative. Thank you for your service. Have a wonderful time. Bless you guys.
Thank you so much, Wes. Thank you. Let's give a final round of applause to all our speakers this afternoon. They were great. They were great. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon as much as I did. The speakers have certainly given us a great launching pad for our discussions tomorrow about how we can all lead innovation in our cities. We invite you to join us at the welcoming reception in the Expo Hall. Thank you, NLC family. Let's have a great evening. Thank you.